Thanks, Eon. Maybe we should have told them in the hall that there's free lunches. We might have got more of a crowd. Now, one of the questions is how should we present IVF results? Well, this is the first IVF pregnancy, and its uniqueness was presented in The Lancet in 1973. But as you can see from the diagram up here, if you look at the HCG level, it only went up to 600, went down again. So today we'd call this a biochemical pregnancy, but nevertheless is the first recorded human pregnancy in The Lancet. An interesting thing is that Professor Carl Wood, who was my boss, was very democratic. So he listed anyone who was associated with the program in alphabetical order. And the first author was one David de Kretzer. The only problem is his name is misspelt with a Z when it's actually written with an S. And I guess there wasn't the same degree of surveillance of everyone signing off on the paper. Oops, sorry. So how was this reported? It was reported on the front page of the papers, saying that there's human life in a test tube. The next pregnancy that we had was the ectopic pregnancy in 1976, which Bob Edwards and Patrick Steptoe had, and that was written up also in The Lancet. Of course, the story really starts here in 1978, on the 25th of July when Louise Brown is born, and there's Bob Edwards and Patrick Steptoe holding Louise Brown as a newborn baby, and that was reported again in the media with lots and lots of French page stories. And there's a story of Louise. This is now 39 years ago in July. The successful birth was recorded as a letter to the editor to The Lancet in August, just a couple of weeks after the birth. And in these days, it was fairly easy to report pregnancy. They were very small numbers. Now, I believe the first ever clinical results of IVF that were publicly presented are these sheets of paper from a meeting which you held in Melbourne in December 1979. So this is about 17 months after Louise Brown was born. And what we have here, we had two teams working sort of together. We had the team at the Queen Victoria Hospital, where both Alex Lapata, AL, and Alan Trounston did the embryology on a 6 weeks off, 6 weeks on basis. And on the other side, we have the Royal Women's Hospital summary, where Alex Lapata did all the embryology. Now, because the Queen Victoria Hospital, the general hospital, we had much more trouble getting theatre time, and you can see that the combined numbers of laparoscopic pickups in that 5 months period was only 47. They did virtually the same up, the women's, in the same period. And you can see if you go through this, it was pretty unrewarding. 29 laparoscopies, of whom 10 had ovulated, so we totally missed the boat. 4 of the women, ovaries weren't accessible to laparoscopy, and we obtained 10 pre-ovulatory eggs. And we ended up having 3 embryos transferred for 29 laparoscopies. Not very good, but this is how results were reported in those days. Alan Trounston, at the same time, the ones he did were 18 laparoscopies, with 2 transfers. If you go across to Royal Women's, they did a bit better. They actually transferred 12 embryos. And of the 12 embryos, they did have they had 2 successful implantations. One of the pregnancies was a pregnancy loss at about 3 months, and the other one was the birth of Candice Reed. These are all natural cycles. Then we changed direction at Queen Vic, and Alan Trounston insisted on using stimulated cycles with clomiphene. And this is the first series of pregnancies ever reported in literature, with 4 pregnancies obtained in clomiphene cycles. We then went ahead and presented our figures for 1980 in the public arena. Again, it's not a very happy picture. Out of 169 women admitted to hospital, 152 had laparoscopy, but there were 15 pregnancy tests which were positive, resulting in 9 births for the second half of 1980. And these, I believe, there were 3 babies born before this. There was Louise Brown, Alistair MacDonald, who was born in January, 1979, conceived by Stapleton and Edwards, Candice Reed. They were the three, and these were from 4 to 13 of the women who delivered babies. So that's kind of presenting figures. This is a much better way to present the results, and this is a picture of an IVF baby's pregnancy, 2-year-old birthday party, and these are all 2-year-old babies. This young lady is my first IVF baby, Julian Stokes, who turned 35 last December, has 2 children of his own. But let's look at numbers. This graph was actually reported in literature, and they were the pregnancy results from the Monash IVF team up to 1984. And in those days, pregnancies were still positive pregnancy tests. Also, you'll notice the figures in the 2 slides I've shown you don't correspond, because everything was done by hand in those days, and it may not have been terribly accurate. But the rate per laparoscopy of a positive pregnancy test was sort of 13% in 1980, under 10% in 81, 12%, 14%, 15%. So it is going up a little bit. And then we realised we could present the figures in much better light by taking per transfer, and in 1983 we did that 16 and 18 per transfer, which sounds much better. The next pregnancies came from America, and this is a paper from Howard Jones. Their first baby was born on 28th of December 1981, and they presented their figures in phases, which meant they could include the time scan, time period they wanted to report their figures. And they talked about their different phases. 1980 phase, which was unrewarding, 1981 phase 1, which resulted in 1 pregnancy, and then they went to phase 2, which improved their figures. So these were the early days, but now we have large numbers and many clinics. And how should we present our figures? Well, you can massage them whichever way you like. And if you look at the denominator, and this has been mentioned by a couple of speakers at this meeting already, we can decide how low we want to go. We can start with patients who've commenced treatment, and that's the intention to treat data, and some people have actually presented that, which I guess is a fair way to look at people who wanted to start. Then we can look at women who start stimulation. They kind of paid their money, taken their hormones. Or we can just consider women actually going to oocyte collection. They're not the failed responders, and it's a more positive group. Or if we like, we can just consider those patients who've had oocytes collected, which is just the metaphase 2, mature oocytes. Or if we want to get really good results, then we can go for patients who are having transfers. Or you can have, sorry, I've got that twice, patient having the transfer. Oh, that's right, ones who had normal embryos for transfer, but maybe didn't get a transfer, and then there's the ones who actually got a transfer. This group here might include the ones who are what we call, we used to call freeze-orb previously, but freeze, sorry Christos, what's the new term? Freeze-only, that's right, freeze-only. So they're the freeze-only ones. If we look at the numerator, that is what numbers we consider, then you're going to get the best results by recalling anyone with the beta HCG greater than 30 positive pregnancy test, like we did in the early days. Or you can talk about a clinical pregnancy, and a clinical pregnancy in most places defined it's ongoing at 20 weeks, or there's ultrasound evidence of a SAC with or without fetal heart, or they've had a pregnancy loss with chronic villi to prove that they were pregnant, or of course an ectopic pregnancy. These are all clinical pregnancies. We can go further, and I think the trend these days is now to talk about patients with live deliveries. And this makes the figures a little bit more realistic for patients. But then we can go to live term deliveries. And if you want to be more precise than that, because of the disadvantage of multiple pregnancies, we can have what David Healy popularised as the BESST pregnancy rate. They're the patients with a birth emphasising successful singleton at term. And David first reported this back in 2004, and he felt it wasn't good enough to just say a baby was born, it should be a term baby. And he also felt that anything but a singleton pregnancy was a reproductive health failure and shouldn't be counted. So he felt that we should report our pregnancy rates, that we deliver a healthy baby, that is not a premature baby, that's going to be handicapped or not survive. and that they should be Singleton babies because of risks to multiple pregnancies. It should be term gestation of this live baby. And he thought that really the first thing was to look at the intention to treat and go back to the intention of at least an oocyte collection. He then looked at the Monash IVF figures for 2001. We had about 2,600 initiated cycles there, and using his BESST criteria, his conclusion with our BESST rate was 11.1%. That is chance of delivering a Singleton at term from an IVF cycle. That got quite a lot of publicity, and he didn't get a whole lot of recognition from his peers who thought it was negative marketing. Because, of course, IVF being commercial everywhere in Australia, there's a lot of marketing involved. The other conceptual problem we have is which couple would say, well, we're going to go and we're going to get pregnant in May or get pregnant in June. So looking at one shot is totally unrealistic. We would say someone should try for 12 months and then we assess the situation. And they would probably have 6 to 12 attempts in that 12 months period. So therefore, it became obvious that we should be presenting an IVF data, not just a single shot, but we should look at several attempts. The problem is doing this, that at any one time, there are some couples who are what we call work in progress. They've started treatment, they haven't completed the treatment, and they haven't got pregnant. So what we would like to do is to be able to say, well, if these couples had completed treatment, and we include them in their figures, and they had the same response to the average couple, what would happen? And that's when the reproductive medicine world turned to life table analysis. In Australia, I must give credit to my colleague Andrew Spears, who's now retired, and Andrew pioneered the application of life tables to reproductive science. He kindly explained it all to me very early in the piece. I think it was about 1979, when we applied it to donor insemination, and I was sold, and I've used this quite a lot. So the principle of life tables comes from Pito and colleagues, who used this sort of life table analysis as sort of a death table to look at the survival of people who were treated with cancer. And they had the same problem. Some people had chemo last week, some had it a year ago, and there was incomplete follow-up. So they've come up with this method of analysing results to come up with a life table. And it intends that simple physicians like myself could use this, and then we could also compare two types of treatment with the log rank test. And I'm going to show this to you in a moment. So we did our first life table on in vitro fertilisation back in 1986. There's a paper published in the Australian Medical Journal of Australia, often called the Blue Comic, because it doesn't have a very high impact factor, but it's read by many doctors. And this is a life table we produced. You can see the error bars, and it shows there's a very nice rise. The more cycles a woman has, the more chance she's got being pregnant. And therefore the chance of life table after 8 cycles is almost 70%. This is of being pregnant. Now, the problem is that many IVF units they get the women pregnant and send them away. So therefore they don't have immediate results of what happens to the pregnancy. And in the early days when follow-up wasn't so good, we didn't even have the feedback all the time. So we had to work off pregnancies, and that overestimates the baby outcome, and I think it's probably now obsolete. We have to look at pregnancies and birth. But all you needed to do to work a life table is to know how many patients went through 1 or 2 pickups or 3 pickups or 4 pickups or so forth. And in these days we're doing laparoscopies, of course. Transvaginal IVF is just coming. You need to know the pregnancies, and it's really easy to work out who got pregnant in that cycle, and then you work out the cumulative pregnancy rate, and by using the appropriate formula, you also get the standard error, and it gives you one of these nice curves. So you can say, well, if you have 5 egg collections, your chance of being pregnant is somewhere between 45 and 55% cumulative. We then went on and increased the numbers, and in 1994, we actually were able to report on 8,000 cycles, we combined GIFT and IVF, because GIFT was very popular on those words. For the young people in the audience who don't know what GIFT is, it's gametic fallopian transfer, which became very popular back in the days because we cut out the laboratory. We could mix the egg and sperm together, put it back into the tubes. And also it was unique because we're a Catholic hospital in Melbourne, the Mercy Hospital Women, actually managed to get approval from the Catholic Church to carry out gift, as long as the sperm is collecting a condom with a hole in it, and as long as there's an air bubble between the egg and the sperm, so they didn't meet reached into the tubes. And the gift program and the Mercy continue on for many years. So we've lumped them all together. You can see that if you go up to 12 cycles, the chance of pregnancy keeps increasing. So it's worthwhile knowing that. It was particularly worse for one of my patients, who in fact had 37 cycles of IVF over 11 years. Now I must explain, we had a 6-cycle stimulated cycle rule in those days. So after she had her 6 stimulated cycles, we did multiple clomiphene cycles, where we might get 1 or 2 eggs or 1 or 2 embryos. After a while, we convinced the government the 6-cycle limit was not helpful, and they brought in stimulated cycles, and her second return stimulated cycle, which was IVF attempt number 37, Trish conceived and Connor was born. And that's a picture of Connor when he was about 2 years old. He's now 15. I did go to his 14th birthday party, and every time I saw her, his mum, she'd say to me, "Look at that, every one of those 37 cycles was worth it." Not only that, she was a very good record keeper, and we could work out that for those 37 cycles over 11 years, which is about 16 years ago, 27 to 16 years ago, it only cost her $32,000. It wouldn't happen today. But anyway, it's an interesting sidelight. If you hang in there, the curve keeps going up. It never gets to 100, but it keeps going up. So having decided life tables were good, then we had another problem. And that although embryo cryopreservation was pioneered by Alan Trounce and Linda Moore back in 1983, it kind of became a very important part of most programs. And in Australia, we like having picnics on the beach, and we have an ice box called an esky. And because we had so many frozen embryos, the stalks, which we saw in our opening talk on yesterday, we had special stalks of frozen embryo ones. They come in an esky. But really, we cannot ignore the frozen cycle. We have had that discussion a little bit today in the presentation as well. But really, Bhattacharya, in his group in 2015, wrote an article looking at cumulative life birth rate. I used to call it compounded life table because we compound the frozen cycles in, but he's called a cumulative life birth rate. And he suggested that we now need to not just analyse the fresh cycles, we must analyse the frozen cycles and credit those to the stimulated cycle or the cycle where the eggs were collected. Well, just to show that we actually were thinking along the same lines, in 1995 we published an article in the Australian New Zealand Journal of O&G, which is called the Red Comic, where we did exactly that. And the point we were trying to make was to compare the pregnancy rate, and this just to show the paper, let's show the proper figures. We want to compare the pregnancy rate for women who did IVF from 2001 to 2005 to those women who had treatment started from 2006 to 2010. So for each group A is the first group B is the second group. We looked at the number of egg collections, how many got pregnant with fresh transfer, and how many had live birth, because we've changed over to looking at birth, because I think that's what we should be presenting. We looked at how many had thawed embryos, how many got pregnant with thawed embryos, how many live births from the thawed embryos, the total live births, and then we've life tabled that. And we did that for both the first group and the second group. And we presented these, as is now fashionable, by Kaplan-Meier analysis, and you can see here that we've been able to show that in fact your chance of pregnancy in 2006 to 2010 was significantly better in a compounded life table analysis comparing fresh and frozen cycles than compared to 2001 2005. So we believe that this is now sort of the gold standard for presenting results, that we should look at multiple cycles, we should look at births which are a term, and we should include fresh and frozen cycles. Now the problem is that even then presenting figures is difficult because we're often comparing apples with pears. And there's the variables that I don't have to explain to this group in this room, that you know there's things like age, the number of embryos transferred in the previous IVF cycles are all things that are affecting prognosis, and therefore would be nice to divide all that out into separate groups of patients, particularly age. These are figures from Monash IVF showing pregnancy rates following transfer. This is pregnancy per transfer, but the point it's making is that there's a declining with age. Now, I found this one, similar information from the Utah Fertility Centre, and they're comparing themselves to natural averages, and even though they're doing much better than national average, they still show the same pattern of decreasing age. So therefore, when you're expressing results, it's really important to know whether you are, what sort of patients you're considering, what age group you're looking at, whether you've got an age group of patients, like often in China, who are very young. In the clinic I worked with in China, the average age is like in the late 20s, in contrast to many of the mature clinics where it's much older. The second thing that's important is what sort of embryos you're transferring. We've seen repeatedly at this meeting that pregnancy rates for blastocyst transfers are much higher than cleavage embryo transfers, and this is just a paper that we published in Human Reproduction that showed that information, and I won't bore you too much. The only important thing is to know that per transfer pregnancy rate, per blastocyst will be higher. If you go back to a pickup, that won't matter. So how can you express results? I've found the online pregnancy calculator, which is available on the internet, and all you have to do is fill in the woman's age, how long she's been trying for, whether she's using her own eggs, what is the etiology, how many attempts have they had, how many were unsuccessful, whether she's been pregnant before, what stimulation she had, was XC used. When you put this in, it actually tells the patient what her chance for live birth is. And I thought it was quite novel. I'm just not quite sure on what they base their data, whether it's a national data or their personal clinic data, but it's certainly an interesting way of expressing results so the patient can do that themselves. Then again, there's other people expressing results, and I also found this on the internet, that if you want the best results in the world, the best fertility clinic is at the Fakih IVF, and Dr. Michael Fakih, you contact him, he's got the very best results in the world. He's US certified, and they're IVF treatment pioneers, and obviously very good, if best in the world. Now, it's not good enough. We're getting scrutinised. This is an article taken out of the Melbourne Age a few months ago, where Monash IVF is getting a punishing because they weren't practicing what they were preaching. The data on the internet was still showing pregnancies and not babies. But it's not only the media who's scrutinising us now. In Australia, we have a body called the Australian Competition and Consumer Commission, and I can tell you they're even more frightened than the tax department. We don't want to get on the wrong side of that group. And they also had some concerns about some of the expression of the way the pregnancy rates were assessed. They have considered that could be misleading and deceptive, and that is something that makes you act very quickly to fix it up. So we're under a lot of scrutiny. So, I hope I haven't confused you too much. If anyone thinks there's a simple solution, they have to go to Disneyland, because that's only in fantasy land. But I think some of the principles are worthwhile thinking about. And the reason we should have results presented properly is that patients can have realistic expectations. Mind you, I'm not sure that's possible, because in my nearly 40 years of doing IVF, I still find that you can tell people that the pregnancy rate for someone who's 44 is only 3%, and they say, well, I'm very young, 44, I'll do fine. So I think patients are very, very unrealistic, and they also deny the situation. We need to have a result expressed so we can benchmark various treatments and various clinics, and also if we're going to do research, multi-centre research, it needs to be very similar. Now, just to show you that we're very topical, here's an editorial or an editor's highlight which Hans Evers circulated to all members of ASHRAE about 10 days ago, and he highlights a paper that came out from Toftager and colleagues from Copenhagen, where they've done exactly what we've been saying: cumulative live birth rates of each ART cycle plus all the resulting freezing source cycles from that. And in fact, then that was presented very much as a live table. The topic of this study was actually comparing agonists to antagonists, and there are two live tables produced here which show 20 months of follow-up, including all fresh and frozen, in fact showing there's no difference. But that's not the point I'm trying to make. The point I'm trying to make is that there are now some people who are following this and looking at live births from the time of introduction, and including live and fresh and frozen embryos. Finally, I would like to send you away with one message. What we don't want in IVF is the alternate truth. It might be good enough to run American alternate truths, But us in an IVF industry, we'd like to be more honest. And I ask you to have the truth, the whole truth, and if possible, present your data by groups, live babies born at term, singletons preferably. I believe there is no place for double embryo transfer in 2017, but that could be the topic of another discussion. And that the patients, you do have to look at a number of cycles, not just one cycle. Because when people look at one cycle, they usually look at their very best time period. Say our pregnancy rate is 50.6% in that time period. And I think going with a longer time, looking at people have several cycles the way to go. So I'm not sure I've given you all the answers, but I hope I've stimulated some discussion. And as I say, I bid you to keep away from the alternative truths and stick to the real truths. Thank you.